We're in talking about natural and non-toxic materials. To put it into the context of Maharishi Vastu architecture, we understand that all of nature is composed of structures, from galaxies to solar systems, to stars, to planets, to our own physiology. And all of these have, as structures, as works of architecture, have blueprints. And we understand that the organizing intelligence at the basis of the blueprints of the structures of nature resides in the Veda, that organizing intelligence at the basis of nature, and that one of its aspects is the structuring or establishing, or we could say the architectural impulse of natural law. And it is this which we can bring to the structures that we create, our buildings and our cities, which we then spend 90 or 99% of our lives within. And if these buildings and cities can be structured in ways that make them analogs of the actual structures of nature, then they become, we could say, something like transparent to the flow of our consciousness. And there is an unhindered link between us and the intelligence of nature. Now, that may sound abstract and not very meaningful, but this translates, as you know, if you've seen earlier webinars, into improvements in mental health, in physical health, in happiness, especially in the happiness of children living in Vastu homes, in reduction of stress, all in measurable ways. So this abstract concept becomes a very concrete thing. Now, the Vedic literature addresses, as you will remember, such things as the way to orient buildings and ourselves to align ourselves with the primary force of natural law on earth, which is the sun, and where to place different functions in a building so that the differing qualities of the sun support our different activities, proportions and measurements from nature, influences from outside the site. These are all part of the timeless intelligence of Vastu. But because we're building now in the 21st century, we're building in a highly industrialized culture, and many, many construction materials are therefore industrialized, manufactured, many even of synthetic materials. And this gives rise to something that we can call the hazards of modern architecture, including electromagnetic radiation, which will be the subject of a different webinar. Instead, today we're going to talk mainly about materials from which we may build, which have an influence on indoor air quality and therefore a direct impact upon our health, and how we can build so that indoor air quality will be only nurturing for us. First of all, why is indoor air quality important to us? Well, it turns out that synthetic materials used in the construction of our buildings can give off chemicals, which are called volatile organic compounds, into the atmosphere, such that research has established that the typical new building has an air quality which is anywhere from 2 to 7 times worse than the atmosphere outside of the house. This is very ironic, especially when people are building a house to improve the quality of their lives. And this as a subject burst into national consciousness, at least in the United States, at a point, I think maybe in the mid-1980s, when the Environmental Protection Agency, which is that US organization that exists to safeguard the quality of our air and water, built a new office building and moved its staff into it in Washington, DC. And within weeks and months, many of the staff had become ill and refused to go to work. And at that point, the EPA was forced to confront the fact that they had built a toxic building. And at great cost, they had to vacate the building, gut it, replace many of the construction materials with non-toxic materials, and greatly increase the amount of fresh air that passes through the building. So this was a wake-up call, and the guiding principle in Vastu, as Maharishi has reconstructed it, has been constant since his first public talks on the subject back in the 1980s, over 30 years ago, which is that we should build of natural materials, we should build of non-toxic materials, and we should have our buildings well ventilated. A goal, if temperatures permit, is for them to be cross-ventilated. Now, over the last few decades, we have become wisely very aware of energy usage, and we have wanted to reduce the carbon footprint of our buildings. And we know, at least in this country, that the construction of buildings accounts for 25% of the energy usage in the United States, or the operation of buildings. So this is an important and serious matter to not only build natural and non-toxic buildings, but to build energy efficient ones. One of the ways that buildings have become more energy efficient in recent decades is by allowing less and less exterior air to get in or out of them, so that less heat is lost in the wintertime. Unfortunately, when that happens, unless certain mechanical steps are taken, indoor air quality then becomes worse. And in ideal tight houses today, according to code, fresh air is brought in intentionally. There are different ways to do this. Some are better, some are less, but we'll leave that subject as to how to bring fresh air into a building ideally for another day. What I want to do right now is move on to the subject of natural and non-toxic construction in buildings, and to distinguish what's the difference between these two words. Well, a natural material is a material that is found in nature. A non-toxic material may be industrially produced, but as far as we can tell, it seems not to outgas toxic chemicals. And the ideal in Vastu is natural. Number two, which is often what we can achieve, is non-toxic. Now, many chemicals in the US are not regulated and are not shown on labels. And so it actually can be a challenge. It can even be impossible to know in any industrialized material for sure what chemicals and whether any harmful chemicals are in it. That's an issue. There's no perfect solution, but we simply want to mention it. Still, it becomes all the more important for us to rely upon people who have been deep in this field for decades, because they have the most knowledge about these things. And that's one reason why Aaron is on the call with us. Let us go on now to dive into some of the specifics with this as a kind of general introduction into the subject of Vastu and how it interfaces with construction materials. And we are, of course, broadcasting from the United States. And so the materials and solutions that we talk about will be a little heavy on those solutions which are widely available in the US and those construction systems which are used here. And I acknowledge that in other parts of the world, some of this information does not apply, but we'll be as broad as we can. And it is true that solutions vary according to climate, according to locale, according to budget, according to the expectations and taste of the client, the availability of materials, the available skill of the builders, your local building codes. And I already mentioned budget, but I'll mention it again because it's such an important element.